So I just filmed an analysis of property in Reeves County. It was a property that one of y'all proposed I look at. I put out there in a live video that I wanted to start doing analysis on a public forum. You know, most of the stuff I do is for private clients and it's private information, and I'm not going to share y'all's private information. But if y'all give me permission to share it, then I would love to, because I think that it's a great learning experience to see what I go through and see what I'm looking at and share that with y'all. That's what this video is today. When I recorded it, it ended up being over 2 hours. And so y'all will see the little clock, that side, this little clock over here. That's what time it is when I'm recording. And I went way long. And so instead of putting out a 2-hour video, I'm going to put out a couple smaller videos into little chunks. And so there'll probably be a several part series on this. Editing Tracy has a long road ahead of her. Hi, my name is Tracy Lenz, and I'm the owner of PECAN Tree Oil Gas and a petroleum engineer. I have a master's and an undergrad in petroleum engineering, and I'm also a certified mineral appraiser. Okay, so the next thing to look at is what activity is happening around here. So I'm going to switch to a map that has all the wells, and we can look at the wells together. If you go to the Railroad Commission website, which has public free maps that you can look at and see what's going on at your property, you might see something that looks more like this, where you have a lot of straight lines that go weird ways across the section. And those are supposed to represent where the surface of the well is. So the big circle is the surface. So like if you walked out onto the property where you would see the wellhead sticking up. And then there's another dot, which is where the well ends. And then they just draw a line between them. So that's not the actual path that the well is taking through the earth. That's just drawing a straight line between the surface and the bottom hole. And sometimes it's close to what it is and sometimes it's not. Now, I have access, and y'all do too. When they drill these types of wells, they have to take an actual survey of where that well is actually going through the earth and then report it back to the Railroad Commission so that they know who is the owner, where the well bores are, liability, payment, all those things, why it's required to have where the well bore is going and what depths. Now, you can take all this information and put it into map form, and then you get something that looks a little easier to read like this. And that's what I'm going off of, where you can see that we have a surface wellhead location that is down in section, what's that, 31? So the surface of these Seavers wells, I'm probably saying that wrong, is you could walk out to where this is on the map and see. Oh, I wonder if we can see that on the Google map. Aha, we can. So this is an aerial view of like a Google satellite view where you can see all of these squares happening here. This is where the wellhead is, and the wells go down in the ground here. As they're going down, they're slowly coming this way, and then one takes off this direction, and one continues further and goes that direction. It's kind of the same color. If I turn off, yeah, now you can see. So these dots are the path of the well. So if you imagine the wells going down into the earth, we'll use this. So if you imagine the well starts off vertical, so this is 0 degrees incline, and as it goes down, eventually they start turning and turn to where you get like to a 45, and then you get to something closer to 90 degrees. And that's when you know it's starting to like go into the reservoir. They've hit what they targeted and they're trying to actually turn. And so I have it to where I consider the well, or this is more for visual purposes. So I start highlighting this well line once it hits around 87 to 85 degrees, because that's pretty close. Sometimes they're drilling into reservoirs that are already tilted. So as they go down, they're going to be targeting something that's tilted. So you kind of have to take that all into consideration. So that's what's happening. They're going down, they're turning, and all of the facilities is here. But the well continues across both sections. Now, if you look, our property's down over here. Why am I even pointing out wells that are over here when the property, that doesn't cross the property? So now we have another thing to look at. So when they drill these wells, there are going to be units that are formed. And the units pull together multiple tracts of land in order to equally and fairly pay everyone who needs to be paid. So they can group together the land of everyone who needs to be paid, but also drill a well that's long enough to be economic. Now I'm going to go to the Texas drilling permit query. And we're going to find that well. So if I look at that well, the API number, which is how things are identified and kept track of, you can give like the social security number of that well is the API number for the well. We won't even use the API. We'll pretend we have even less information than that. So we have the, how do you spell it? SEIVERS. So the lease name, which is what the wells are called, is the lease name. And we won't look at operator, but we do know that we're in Reeves County. Let's see what that pops up, right? So don't hit the one that you think it's supposed to be with the return. That clears everything. Hit submit. Okay, so that wasn't it. Let's try spelling it correctly. SIEVERS. Okay, so we have Reeves County. Lease name starts with Sivers. Someone tell me how to say that. Hit submit. Oh, here we go. Okay, so we have these are all the permits that have been filed with that lease name in Reeves County. So then I can pull up the well that is called the Sivers 2-35 South Unit 6H. So you can either say view all. I'm going to sort by well number. Actually, no, I'm going to sort by status because that's the more recent things. And let's see, it's the South unit that we want to look at. So South unit. So now we're on the Railroad Commission's page, and I'm going to pull up all the fun stuff's at the bottom. So we have these file attachments. And these attachments are where you can find what the unit looks like for that well. And the plat is the most useful thing. Just visually, you can get this information from others. But let's just pull up the plat. This is the unit that was pulled together for that well. And if we zoom in, you see this is how I was calling it section 31 earlier, but section 35. So we have section 30 and section 35. And this blue line is identifying what the unit is that they are using. So the lease line, right? So that is the lease that they're considering. Anyone within that blue line is owed money for this lease. Now, don't let that confuse you with the lease that you signed. It's not necessarily the definition of each individual lease within that lease. It is there's a lot of common terminology in this industry. So we have the proposed well path in red and the lease line in blue. Those are the important things in this document. So let's take that and put that on top of the map that we're looking at. Okay, so this well in red is the one that we just looked at on the plat. And if I were to put and I'm going to draw the unit on top of that. So it starts in section 31, section 30, goes down to the bottom of section 35, goes across all of section 35, and then hits about halfway between those two wells and goes up to the top of section 30. Now, another thing that's helpful is to pull how many acres are being included. Now this shows that we are looking at a unit that is 636.14 acres. Okay, so now I have the outline of that Sivers South unit on here, and you can see that that does include that property that we're talking about. So that's why this is interesting to this person. But the other, now they made a note they aren't getting paid on the north well. And the reason that they aren't getting paid on the north well is for the the mirror image of the south well is happening on the north well, where if we go back to that listing, so the north unit there, the north unit has a mirror image plat of the south unit, where instead of looking like a big D, it looks like more like a B. Like a B. Here we go. So the property that we're looking at today is over here. So that's not included in the lease line. So that's why they aren't getting paid for this well. They're only going to get paid on wells that their property is included in for that unit or lease, however they're wanting to call it. There are some other things that are happening in that Railroad Commission map that we're looking at. Now, if you remember, the property is right here. It's right just south of this highway. It's right here. And you're like, well, what is this line? We're only talking about this long line. We're not talking about this one. What is that? So what you can do is you can look up on the Railroad Commission's site that same way that we just looked up that Sivers unit. But I'm going to shortcut us to the answer of that one. And that is an expired permit that was filed. So someone permitted to drill a well called the Able 2-30, but then that permit was ended up never getting drilled, and it's now expired. So it's no longer an active permit. So there's quite a bit else going on around here. And so the most obvious thing that's going to affect the value is that well that is actively producing royalties. Now, the interest that this sunshine unit has in that Sivers well is dependent upon how many net acres they have of this gross property. So the gross property is what you'd put a fence around, and then the net acreage would be what you'd actually get paid on. So if you think of it like if you own stock, Google is the gross company, right? That's the Google, you're not gross. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. But Google is the full company. But if you own a share of Google, you own a little sliver of all of Google, right? So if you think of the gross acreage being Google and your net acreage being how many shares of Google you own, that's why you actually only get paid on some unless you own all of it. Now there's people who own all of the minerals underneath their surface and land, and that's common in areas that didn't have as much activity historically. But for this area, it's very common for there to be multiple owners of the land. That's called an undivided interest. There's divided interest, which is more like how a subdivision works, where everybody owns all of their property, but it's divided into a bunch of little plots. An undivided interest is that stock analogy, where everybody owns a little piece of the pie. So we happen to know that this is broken up into 5 different owners. And so for this particular property, we're going to assume that the owner owns 1/5 of the acreage, which is 7.92 net acres. Because we know that there were 5. So grandpa owned this property. There were 5 kids that it got dispersed to. And then the owner of the property now has 1/5 of what used to be the entire property. Instead of looking at all 39 acres, we're looking at 7.92 net acres. Now, I don't have the official lease that was signed for this, but it looks to be a 25% lease, which means that they'll get paid 25% of any production that happens, that this lease is pooled into or unit part of, or basically anything that comes out of this well, they'll get 25% of. Right now, we're going to calculate how much they probably have in that Sivers well. Now, we're not starting, this first column is to calculate going from, if you have the pay, how much acreage you probably have. But we have how much acreage we have, and we're going to calculate how much pay we should be getting. So starting off with our net mineral acres, so remember that's how many shares we own of the company. So that's the 7.92. Now, if they own all 30, we'll look into how much it would be if they own all of it. Now, then when you look at the unit size for that well, how much land is being pulled together, how many people are getting paid or need to get paid. Based on this plot that we looked at, it said 636.14 acres. So we're going to take that number and plug it into here. We're assuming a 25% lease royalty. And so then their royalty decimal, which is what they would, like if they got paid and they are getting paid, what is likely on their check is every dollar that comes out of the well in terms of payment, they get 0.00311 dollars of every dollar. That'd be one way to look at it. Now, it doesn't seem like much when most of these wells make, let's assume, I don't know, $14 million of revenue over the life of this well, and you're getting that much of it. Multiply those two numbers together, and yeah, $43,000 just from that one well. So that's not how much you could sell that interest in that well for, that because that's over the life of the well. But if you were to, that's how much cash you could expect to get to your bank account approximately if the well made $14 million of royalties. Now, 7.9 acres of this parcel is worth about $100,000 just because of this production here. But that's not all you need to look at. A lot of the estimates out there will take your royalty production and just multiply it times the number and say, oh,